thank you for the opportunity to meet with you all and sit together and have a conversation about taking our practice off the cushion and um, into service to other folks.
All right, thank you. So with that, we'll begin our conversation with Reverend Daiken Nelson Roshi. Uh, so I wonder if we could start because I feel like you really are standing in lineage with Glassman Roshi with the nature of the work you're doing. You know, when I read about do you pronounce it Mandala Cafe? Is that how you are saying it? Yeah, okay.
You say mandala, I say mandala.
Okay, yeah, sort of tomato tomato situation.
Right.
All right. Well, you know, in the when I read about the Mandala Cafe, I couldn't help but immediately think of Glassman Roshi and the work that he did with, I believe, formerly incarcerated individuals, um, giving them work in a bakery, right? Greyston, is that right?
Right. So, 40 years ago, actually, Bernie and the Zen community of New York founded what became the Greyston Foundation, based in Yonkers. Bernie had been living in Los Angeles and studied with Maizumi Roshi and helped create the Zen Center of Los Angeles, which at one point was this very large residential community doing daily sitting, talks 3 times a week, and retreats and training and empowerments and kind of the traditional residential Zen model, based on Maizumi Roshi's experience of uh, being a priest in Japan, as well as what has kind of been introduced to into the West. And after Tetsugen, his Dharma name at that point, after he was authorized to be a teacher, Bernie moved back to New York and landed in Riverdale and kind of started to replicate that idea of a residential training center. And then he decided that he didn't really want to recreate that model. He'd already kind of done that. So he wanted to do something to be a service. And he wound up being introduced to Yonkers, which is right next door to Riverdale, which at that point was very impoverished. It was kind of very down on its heels. Lots of empty storefronts and a lot of folks living on the streets or in some of the empty buildings with mental health issues and substance use issues. Some of them had been incarcerated, some of them were kind of in a rotating door of getting picked up and released. And so Bernie wanted to do what he could to help these folks. And so they started, initially, they started a bakery, and they were making kind of high-end, nice dessert type things, and then they established contacts with places in the city that would buy them. And they had an open hiring policy of anyone who walked through the door who was willing to work could, start by sweeping floors, unloading trucks, dealing with the pantry and inventory, things like that, and then progress and learn more skills. And so then after that got established, they were chatting with the folks, and they said, so we've been able to provide some part-time employment. What else do you need? And they said, well, I really need a place to live. And so the next phase was to take some of those buildings that had been sitting empty for a while, negotiate with both the city and the state, and then eventually the federal government, the HUD program, Housing and Urban Development Program, to be able to acquire the houses, renovate them in order to create low-income housing for people. And then that also provided some jobs for some of the same folks.
And this was done using essentially Dana from his community.
And raising money and grants and federal, state, local, state, and federal programs that were contributing to housing and things like that. So it's a very large organization.
Yeah. So Glassman Roshi ended up becoming quite an operation, quite a robust operation. And my understanding is that the Greyston Bakery ended up being the designated baker of, I think, maybe brownies for the brownie chunks that ended up in Ben and Jerry's ice cream, and that ended up being the huge sort of the sort of connection. I would say a windfall, except it was through their efforts, but the sort of huge opportunity where they could really move a lot of products, hire a lot of people, and help a lot of people. It was that connection with Ben and Jerry's. Is that right?
Yes. There is a group that started in the 90s called the Social Venture Network, which is made up of founders and CEOs of organizations, companies, businesses that wanted to have a very strong service model as part of their work. The idea of doing good and while doing well.
Yes.
So the Body Shop and Ben and Jerry's were two of those founding members, and then other people from different organizations that were more on the service provision were also invited in, and that's how Bernie got to know Ben Cohen mostly, and created that relationship, which continues to this day, of making brownies. And then the Greyston Bakery has also kind of marketed their own, some of their own products. One of them called Do Goodies, which are like brownies and blondies that they sell at Whole Foods and different places around.
Oh, that's great. I mean, I wonder if maybe the next time we have a Sitheads dinner party, we'll have to stock up some of the desserts from Greyston. That only seems appropriate. So there in Glassman Roshi's work, and again, I see this mirrored in what you're doing. It's unconventional what he did. It was not a typical Dharma activity, as far as I know. Maybe it is in Japan or something. I'm not familiar. Where I don't think so. And there are, and it's an unconventional approach that really puts roll up your sleeve service first in terms of your spiritual practice, and not only that, but it also sort of accommodates itself to the sort of capitalist societal framework in which we all find ourselves embedded, right? It does its best to sort of flow with that, and start a business, but one that hires people who need to be hired. So I wonder, are there other examples you can think of, either in your own work, in other Zen, in the work of other Zen teachers or other spiritual teachers in general, where you see this harnessing or leveraging of the unconventional, the outside the box, to pursue the service dimension of Dharma, or any dimension of Dharma?
I'm not familiar with other Buddhist organizations who are doing the kind of business-based, but something like Homeboy Industries, which was
sure.
by
I used to live in LA. I know them.
Yeah, so started by a Catholic priest to help folks in kind of the southern part of LA, which had become was experiencing lots of different challenges with drugs and gangs and things like that, but to provide opportunities for folks to do something with their life, and as well as support themselves in terms of employment, but also a huge community garden effort and a huge opportunity for people to involve more members of their families and things like that. But in terms of this emphasis on service, it goes back to the historical Buddha who's told his monks, go forth and tell people how to end suffering. Teach them meditation and tell them that, this feeling that we have that things aren't quite right, this dukkha, this, often gets translated as suffering. It's more like just not rightness. This feeling that most of us have, which comes from wanting things to be different than they are, that there's a way out of that. And the way is, both living in accord with the Eightfold Path, but then also being aware of and lessening one's attachment to wanting things a certain way. So, going all the way back to Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha, he encouraged his monks to go out and teach generosity, nonviolence, interdependence, things like that. And in terms of groups, there's Soka Gakkai International, the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, Buddhist Global Relief, International Network of Engaged Buddhists, Zen Peacemakers, International Campaign for Tibet, the Order of Interbeing, which is the Sangha of Thich Nhat Hanh, a group called the Clearview Project. All of these people have created something from their sanghas, from their communities, to do good in the world.
Well, this is an interesting point you raise, because you're absolutely right. The Buddha himself emphasized service among his monastics, but the service that he encouraged them to perform was passing along and teaching the Dharma. And that has been, I think, traditionally more the province of, or traditionally more how service manifests in the context of the Buddhist Sangha. It's go give the most precious thing we understand ourselves to have, which is the Dharma, which is the teachings of liberation. So, and I feel like if you look over the centuries, it has developed in such a way that in some quarters, it's almost understood that the best thing you could do for other people is to go into a cave and practice and radiate your awakened mind, for the benefit of all beings, but not actually, hand a loaf of bread to anyone, or, there is a sense in which, I've heard teachings like that, and I'm not here to say what's right or what's wrong or to denigrate those approaches, but there is a current in Buddhism that seems, in a way, to almost view itself as, to view more meat and potatoes service in terms of taking care of people's material needs as lesser service, as compared to offering Dharma, or in some cases not even doing that, just simply being awakened and contributing to the, contributing your awakened mind to the interpenetrating web of all beings. What are your thoughts on that, you might say, tension?
Personally, I don't see it as a tension. Kind of given, just given the nature of karma, a person, place, a time, and a teaching. For some folks, their service is going to be to go sit in a cave. For other folks, they're going to create an organization that feeds people like we do, or trains people like we do, or raises money to give to folks in developing countries in order to create a sustainable income and lifestyle for them, or to create opportunities for people to come together around issues of peace or policing or anti-war, social economic justice, education, the variety of different focuses for the work that people are doing.
Yeah. And in terms of these different focuses, how do you feel about the importance of getting your hands dirty in terms of making sure that your service is in some sense face-to-face, being directly in touch with the people that you're serving? So for instance, my partner and I approach this differently. So what I do is I mostly give money. I give, a decent portion of my income every month to various organizations that I think are doing important charitable work. And then in terms of actually serving with my hands, the truth is, or even face to face, the truth is my service is mainly limited to being the guy who sends the emails that let people encounter teachings like yours through this organization. But mostly I'm giving dough, I'm giving money. My partner, she much prefers, she tables for a food bank, she hands out food, she does face-to-face work. And we have these interesting conversations where I'm like, well, I do what I do to have as big a systemic impact as possible. And she talks about how it feels a little bit sterile to just give money, and she wants to connect. What are your thoughts on the importance of the face-to-face connection, seeing the people you're helping, smiling at them, handing them something, helping them with something, versus doing something that might have an impact, but is in some ways at arm's length?
A similar response to the most recent question. Everyone has their own place to be. For some people, it's not practical for them to go out and work at a soup kitchen or to do voter registration or something like that. They may be housebound or not have the physical abilities to be able to do that. And so for them, they can be a tech person, they can make donations. And one of the great things about Buddhism is that it tends to flatten hierarchies, and so one form of service is not any better than the other. I will say that I do feel that people who have the means and abilities do need to get involved in something. So, the idea of if one is given things, then one gives things. Mm-hmm. And if that's, and again, that can express itself in any number of ways. And the kind of the Buddhist idea of right livelihood from the Eightfold Path, it's finding a way to engage oneself in something that makes use of one's skills and interests and also does good in the world. So it's not like, oh, you must be a Buddhist priest. That's like that's the best thing ever, and everyone should be doing that, because that is not everyone's path. And so to be to be a person who has like a 9-to-5 job and is part of a sitting group and supports that, or a person writes a book about their experience of coming to practice. So again, there's no kind of distinction between the offerings, and people should be encouraged to offer what they can, however that manifests for their life.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, all of it is in figuring out little gradations between ways of giving seem unimportant as compared to the difference between giving and not giving, right? That's the chasm to cross. Um,
And even not to. I'm not saying this is what you're doing, but not to denigrate non-giving, because some people may say, I'm tapped. I can't, I don't have time, I don't have energy, I don't have the resources to be
sure.
able to do that. And so, I sit and I'm kind, and that's my service to the
Put
world.
on your own oxygen mask first, etc.
Right.
Yeah. Um, there's one more thing I wanted to ask, and then we could open it up to Q&A if that's all right. Um, I wanted to talk a little bit about. I want to talk about the impact. It's a bit of a paradox to talk about the benefits to oneself of serving others, but it's an interesting paradox how serving others and serving oneself end up not being at all at odds. They end up dovetailing so beautifully. The Dalai Lama speaks about this frequently. He likes to say things like, if you want to be selfish, be wisely selfish, care for others, right? Or he says things like, if you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want yourself to be happy, practice compassion. There's this interesting way in which, even if you are not a wholly altruistic being in your heart just yet, that part of you hasn't fully ripened just yet, there are even self-interested reasons to start walking down that path of becoming more altruistic and practicing altruism. And so ultimately, essentially, there's a non-altruistic reason to turn yourself into an altruist, which is beautiful, I think. Could you speak a bit to the benefits, particularly for a yogi, for a meditator, or a spiritual practitioner, the benefits that one experiences oneself from engaging in service or giving?
There's a character in Zen history named Bodhidharma. He was an Indian monk who made his way to China, and the passage at that time, this was about 500 years after the historical Buddha, and about and the passage took so long that word of his arrival arrived before he was able to, just traveling over the ocean and different things. But people traveled over land and said, "This Indian monk is coming." Kind of the Paul Revere of that era, would say, Bodhidharma is coming, Bodhidharma is coming, and the emperor at that point had there was a kind of an interest and a development of Buddhism that had made its way from India, and the emperor had built monasteries and supported monks to travel over from India and to work with people to do translations and to do all of these things to be a benefit to the planting of the seeds of Buddhist practice in China. So eventually Bodhidharma shows up, and the emperor is there to greet him, and the emperor says, "I've done all these things. I've paid for, I've supported translators and built monasteries and libraries and all of these things, and what merit have I gained?" And Bodhidharma said, "None whatsoever." Because, his intention was, I'm going to do these great things in order to get merit. So one needs to be clear as to why one is doing, basically anything, but why one is being of service. If one is going into it to get something, that's a fine intention. But then there's always this kind of evaluation, like I was talking about earlier. It's like, did I get something? Did I get what I was looking for?
Hmm.
And that's different than was I of service to someone? So we get benefits, and in an ideal world, those are secondary to what we have offered and what we have given. And
Interesting.
we may never know what the benefits are. I mean, the interactions that happen between our volunteers and the guests that we serve, we hand out food to folks, and there are some people who are terrified of people who are either unhoused or have mental health or substance use issues. And if a person is handing out a meal and you're actually talking to that person, you realize that they're just a person and living with whatever conditions they have. And you realize that they're not so scary. So that's a benefit. And I don't know that anyone goes in there, oh, I'm going to volunteer to make homeless people less scary. And, it's something that can happen for folks.
Yeah. Interesting. Um, let me wrap by asking, for your work at the Mandala Cafe, what do you need? If someone wanted to be of service, if someone wanted to help, lend a hand, pitch in, support the good work that you're doing, um, it sounds like you are both feeding people who need it and helping people who need it find work or gain work skills, right? You're doing both
Right.
of those things, if I understand correctly.
Right.
So
So,
in those efforts happening up in Harlem.
um, yes, Harlem, Morningside Heights, Bloomingdale, Manhattan Valley area, northern, upper Midwest, upper West Side.
Mm-hmm. So those who are not in New York, you could certainly offer Donna. That's if you're not here physically. But what do you most need, Roshi? We have some people here. More people are going to watch the video. Um, and so what's on the Mandala Cafe's wish list in terms of things they could use help with?
Um, just to clarify, at this point we do three things. We do a 12-week culinary training program for folks with challenges to finding and keeping a job.
Mm-hmm.
We proctor them through health certification, and then for those people who successfully make it through the program, we work and we try to place them. We can't guarantee a job at this point, and we work with restaurant groups and individual restaurants and some institutions like Columbia University to try to get folks a job. And then I also have a catering business which employs some of those folks and other people as a way to make some money, and also provide on-the-job training. And then we're involved in 3 feeding programs. We have 2 weekly meals, Wednesday lunch and a Wednesday dinner, and then every other Sunday we have dinner in collaboration with a renewal synagogue here in town. So there's this interfaith element, which I think is also important. And so, for those people in New York, we can use volunteers. People to help cook, people to help pack, people to hand out meals, those kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
For those people who are not in New York, and anyone who passes through is welcome, to make this part of your vacation. It's like spend a few hours with us. We've had that happen. We had this wonderful couple from Austria wrote me and said, we're going to be in New York for a week and we found out about your program. We want to come volunteer. And they came and they helped us on a Wednesday dinner.
It's really nice.
Yeah, it's very sweet. And they were, great people who were, kind of walking the talk. And for those folks who are outside, we need, it'd be great to have administrative help. It'd be great to have like somebody to help with bookkeeping, somebody to help with marketing, or kind of all of the aspects of running a business and getting the word out. Grant writers, people who are willing to kind of look for grants that might be of benefit to us, and those kind of things.
Yeah.
And then there is always Dana. There is always that energy of generosity, and our costs are fairly low. We can put a meal out for about $3, and so $10 feeds 3 people, kind of thing. So it's the many donations at low amounts kind of thing. And and if people are connected with foundations or other organizations that might be of benefit, introductions are always great. Spreading the word about what we do and what we're doing, connecting us with other organizations that might have similar missions and all of that.
Well,
and also I have my meditation group, and people are welcome to join that. We're at this point where we've had 3 places where we've done meditation, none of which are available right now. So I'm like beating the bushes and calling people and talking to people at different places to try to find a place to meet in person. So we're exclusively online, but we sit on Mondays, and Monday evenings we have meditation and a discussion, much like this. And then Friday mornings we have just sitting. And once a month we have a half-day meditation retreat from like 7 in the morning until noon. And we also have an affiliate group in Youngstown, Ohio, where one of my students is a Unitarian minister. And I'm actually heading to Youngstown this weekend to lead our monthly zazen, our monthly half-day from there. So,
great. So what I'm going to do, Roshi, and we'll go to Q&A in a second, but what I would like to do is, if you shoot me an email, you have my email address. If you shoot me an email with some of those more specific, like technical or like specific skilled roles, like a bookkeeper, a grant writer, etc. If you send that to me, I'll send out to the Sitheads email list asking if we have anyone with those skill sets, and I'll just beat the bushes a little bit and see. I don't know if we do, but let's find out. And if that sounds okay with you, just shoot me an email with those roles, and I'll send that out. I also have been thinking for some time that I would like this Sitheads organization to have a service wing to it. Serve heads, if you will. And so I am adding right now a serving and giving channel to our Slack. There it is, that exists now. And I would like us to start maybe organizing some opportunities for people in this group to roll up their sleeves and provide some service. And I wonder if perhaps a nice inaugural endeavor, a nice inaugural outing might be to help with one of your organizations preparing food or serving food. I wonder if you'd welcome us to.
Absolutely. Yeah, that would be great.
Okay. I think working with a sort of dharmic, Buddhist oriented, spiritually oriented service organization seems like a great place to start. So Sitheads, stay tuned for that. I've said it publicly, so now I have to do it. So we will do it. And I think it'll be great. So
thank you.
Yeah. No, it'll be, I'm looking forward to that. And then thank you for inspiring.
Yeah.
All right. Let's do Q&A, shall we? Does that sound okay, Roshi?
Sure.
So I have a private question that just says, what is the proper way to address Mr. Roshi? Sorry for the naive question.
Daiken is fine. I don't stand on formality. in the Zen tradition, in the White Plum lineage, which is Maizumi Roshi and his 12 successors, and they're at this point close to 100 successors. There are both lay and ordained teachers, and so I ordained many years ago at the Zen Center in Los Angeles, and so technically I'm Reverend Daiken Nelson. Then one studies usually finds a teacher and develops a one-on-one study relationship, and then at some point both the student and the teacher and the community kind of acknowledge that this person has stepped into the role of being a leader and taking on some responsibility of some sort. And then there's a ceremony that happens where that person becomes a senior in the community. And then study continues, and in our tradition, in the Rinzai tradition, there's two main schools in the Zen tradition. There's there's more than two, but the two main of the many are Rinzai and Soto. And the Rinzai, they have what are called koans. It's like a public case. It's a story, usually between a teacher and a student, or a teacher and a number of students, where the Buddhist teachings, the Dharma teachings are expressed. The one that has made it to kind of the common experience is, what is the sound of one hand clapping? And
A
so
classic, yes.
the person will sit with that until they have a response. And then it's up to the teacher to decide whether that's kind of both genuine and whether it's embodied and present in the moment. And then so there are literally almost 2,000 of these koans, but one form of study is koan practice, starting at the beginning and going up through several hundred of these. And some people don't do koans. In the Soto, they don't do koans, and so a person will study with a teacher until the teacher decides the person's ready to kind of take on the mantle of teaching. And then there's another rite of passage that happens, and that person becomes a sensei or a teacher. And then after a while, and this may or may not happen, kind of depending upon this situation, one can receive what is called Inka, which is kind of the final documentation that this person has been doing this long enough. They could run their own place, and kind of there's nowhere else for them to go. They're kind of at the peak of practice. And so then that title is Roshi.
Mm-hmm.
And so Reverend Daiken Nelson Roshi, and just Daiken is totally fine.
Yeah. And is it inappropriate for me to have been calling you Nelson Roshi? I often hear last name Roshi, last name
either one.
Sensei.
Yeah. No, either one is fine.
All right. So the person who asked that question, you got options. And thank you, Daiken. I appreciate your answering that question.
Mm-hmm.
So following up on that, we now have a question. Leon, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Daiken, for your presentation. My question is as follows. I noticed that when John would ask your question, you would immediately close your eyes, contemplate your answer, and you never kind of immediately went into answering the question, but took that moment. Is that something you were taught to do in your years of teachings? Is that something that you just naturally do? And when you do that, what is it that you're doing at that moment prior to actually giving an answer?
Good question. It's a somewhat natural inclination that I have. And also it's something that I have developed over years of practice. There are ways, there's many ways to respond to a question. Somebody asks you a question and you can say, well, that's a stupid question, or don't you know that, or something like that. Or you can say, oh my gosh, that's the best question ever. Or for me, it's just taking a moment and reviewing the question, and then feeling where I'm drawn to respond to that. And so I just spend a little time in silence and see where I'm drawn. And one aspect within the Zen Peacemaker order, one practice that has developed over time in collaboration with a group, is called council practice. And there were some folks who were connected with some First Nation indigenous groups, and was spending time with them, and they experienced their mode of communication and governance and problem solving. And so, traditionally folks would sit in a circle and folks would just say something rather than hold forth on some idea. They would just speak from their heart and say, this is what I'm experiencing now. And often the case would not be to directly respond to the person, but to tell a story. So rather than directly respond to the question about what benefit does a person gain by service, I was prompted to tell that story of Emperor Wu and Bodhidharma. Just because that's a classic story from our history. Whether it's true, whether it happened, it's a good story. And there was a person who went into service with the intention of getting something from that. So rather than me saying, oh well, I think blah blah blah, I put my words in the mouth of Bodhidharma and chose that response.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Leon. And thank you, Roshi.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. We have a question that was sent to me to read. So I will read it. Is meditation instruction part of the culinary training?
Yes. One thing that separates our culinary training from other programs is we have a component called life skills, and we teach folks meditation. I have a formerly incarcerated Muslim imam who comes in and teaches Tai Chi. We teach yoga, both some very gentle movement and also chair yoga. The person who co-trains with me is an herbalist. And so she talks to folks about how to support themselves through diet and using herbal things rather than some of the other opportunities that exist in professional kitchens. But yeah, we teach people to meditate. So that's, and that's something that they'll use both in the work world and also outside of that. And I've had one person come from the culinary training and join my sitting group that I have. So she comes from time to time as part of that.
That's great. That is really quite a lot of non-culinary sort of holistic training in kind of preserving one's own well-being.
Yeah.
That's wonderful. So your lineage is are Soto lineages. Is that correct?
Maizumi Roshi, his father and father-in-law, let me think. His father and his mother's father were Soto Zen priests.
Okay.
And his father was involved in the administration of the Soto school in Japan. They like a little country. They have a legislative entity to deal with, kind of rogue priests and coming up with kind of rules for running a temple and things like that. And his father, Maizumi Roshi's father, was the head of that. And so Maizumi Roshi grew up in the Soto tradition, and then he received Dharma transmission from his father, Kuroda Roshi. And then he studied with another teacher named Yasutani, who is a person who also had made his way to the West and had and started kind of his own school, which revitalized meditation practice within the Soto sect. Meditation was something great in theory, but it was more kind of like running a temple and doing baby blessings and weddings and funerals and memorial services, and it became kind of like a business. And so Yasutani kind of chided them and said that they had all become a bunch of funeral directors and no one sat anymore. So he was very interested in, as Zen was making its way into the West, he was very interested in emphasizing meditation practice. And so he started his own Three Treasures school. And there are Robert Aitken, who was a Western teacher who wound up in Hawaii, was one of his students, and there are several other folks. So Maizumi Roshi studied and completed studies with him, so he received a second authorization. And then Maizumi Roshi felt something was missing, and so he was introduced to a lay Rinzai teacher, and he went through koan practice. And so the white plum, which is named after Maizumi Roshi's father, his Dharma name was Baizan, which is white plum. So the white plum is kind of an amalgam of Soto and Rinzai.
I see. So given that, are you able to speak a little bit to what your own practice looks like? I mean, I assume that you're not just in the kitchen. I assume that you sit zazen and
Sure.
and for those who don't know, that's Japanese Zen terminology for sitting meditation, essentially. Could you speak a little bit about, and then I do see we have a question here, but since I'm already in the middle of it, can you speak for a moment about your own more not the service dimension, but your own contemplative practice, and perhaps how that interfaces with your service work?
I'll do my best.
Right.
So most Westerners in the 21st century were not born Buddhist. Some people were, but most people are not and come to it later in life. They have good karma and they're introduced to it, and so they start a sitting practice. So I started my meditation practice after college. I've always been a seeker. I went in to my small 4-year liberal arts school in the Midwest, founded by Norwegian Lutheran pastors, as a pre-seminary major. So I always had that kind of draw towards doing something clerical in that way. And wound up not doing that, not going to seminary as I had planned. But then after college, started searching for something that would give meaning to my life. And so I started reading everything I could get my hands on. I was raised kind of lukewarm Methodist in the Midwest. And I went to Quaker Friends meetings. Friends dragged me to their churches. I went to Catholic Mass, and I went to a Tibetan teacher who happened to be passing through town. And then one day, this friend of mine said, I've been going to this meditation place. You might like it. And so I went, and it was a classroom in the Unitarian Universalist Society, which every Wednesday night, bells and cushions would be drug out from cabinets and set up like a zendo. My beginning meditation instruction was, see that cushion over there, sit and spin and face the wall, fold your legs and put your hands in your lap. That was my beginning meditation instruction. It's like, okay. So I did. And there was something about it that I felt very compelling. I felt, on one level, I felt like I'd come home. And so that began my meditation practice. And currently, I lead the Palm Sula Zen Center. And at this point, we're meeting online twice a week. And then once a month, we do the half-day meditation retreats. I have my own daily practice. I have an evening service that I do, which kind of sends merit to those folks who are in some sort of healing crisis, or I do, memorial acknowledgement for folks who have recently passed, or if it's an anniversary of someone. And then I have about 10 students in various stages of study, some of whom are studying to receive the precepts, which in our tradition, it's a ceremony that one goes through. We study the 16 Bodhisattva precepts, one after the other, and we find how those are alive in our life. And then we go through the paramitas, which are these kind of intentions or practices, like as has been mentioned, dana, which is generosity, how that is alive in our life. And then this is called a rakasu, and it's a representation of a monk's robe. The monk's robe is big and wraps around the shoulder and is worn in formal situations. And this is less formal and also used, it's more convenient than like wrapping oneself in the full robe. So the student sews this and then receives a Dharma name and takes refuge in the practice. So I have a few folks who are studying for that. I have one person who ordained with me about 4 years ago, and we're continuing his study with an idea towards Dharma transmission at some point. I have one person who's at the beginning of his priest study. He lives in Los Angeles. He's somebody I've known for 25 years, who just kind of showed back up in my life. And he said, remember that conversation we had, which I did, where we were both studying with the teacher, the one I ordained with, and he was also studying with that teacher. And he had spoken with that teacher about ordaining, and it never kind of happened before they went their separate ways. But he and I had several conversations over the years. And so he's back and we're studying towards his ordination. So I spend a lot of time on Zoom each week, one-on-one with these students. And then I go to, I consider myself a kind of a multi-faith practitioner. I'm a member of the Renewal Synagogue that collaborates with the meal. So I participate in services and things with them from time to time. This evening, I'm missing a Sufi group that I spend time with from time to time. And I'm very interested in finding the commonalities between different spiritual traditions. And the reason that I said most of us come to Buddhism later is that many of us have been introduced or raised in some tradition. And Buddhism doesn't have an evangelical intention. So we're not trying to get people to convert. We're not out, trying to fill the pews with people, and it's not about numbers. And so one doesn't have to label themselves a Buddhist or become Buddhist. A person may identify as that. That's their personal choice. But I'm very interested in finding the commonalities between the different spiritual expressions and finding language from those traditions so that I can talk to folks who come from, whatever their family background is, whatever their spiritual orientation might be.
Yeah. I wonder, are you familiar with the Thai monk, Buddhadasa Bhikkhu?
I know of him, but I don't I don't know him. I've read some of the writings that I've come across.
Yeah. He wrote something called No Religion that's really, it's not anti-religion, it's pursuing the fundamental unity of religions. He was somewhat controversial in his time and in his milieu for really feeling that at their core, all religions were saying similar or even the same things. It just, what you were just talking about made me think of Buddhadasa as a fellow Buddhist cleric who, despite his loyalty to Bodhidharma, ultimately sought and found that same spirit in a bunch of other religious traditions.
Well, and now in Buddhism, there's a strong wave of what sometimes gets called secular Buddhism, which removes some of the kind of the bhakti, some of the devotional aspects of the tradition and focuses more on the practices of the meditation and things like metta practice. Things where folks are, so they remove all of the kind of bells and whistles and bring it down to just a fundamental experience of the essence of the practice. Stephen Batchelor is a person who's written extensively.
Sure, Buddhism without beliefs.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. All right, let me get to this person's question. This person asked, and I'll just ask for them. I was wondering if there is any advice on how to practice while also going through the stages of grief. Do you have any thoughts on that, Roshi?
Ultimately, one starts where one is. Grief affects each one of us uniquely, and it depends on the nature of the loss, the closeness of the person or being that has passed. But ultimately, it's just, as I mentioned with the Four Noble Truths, that most of us have this feeling that something's not quite right, something's a bit off, and the source of that is desire. We want things to be different than they are. And so that can be a place where folks can get into more added challenge to experiencing grief, in that we have these ideas of, oh, it's been X amount of time, I shouldn't be feeling this way. And so just to let go of those ideas that it should be anything different than it is, and just to endeavor to experience what is happening right now and be sad or be lonely or be joyful of remembering this one thing that happened between you and the person or the pet or whatever the case may be. And so just allowing things to be as they are is kind of the essence of our practice, and it works really well with a kind of heightened experience of something like grief. And also, there's a teaching called the Brahma Viharas, or the Illimitables, 4 aspects that one gains by practicing. The deeper one's insight, the more one is aware of these. Karuna, or compassion, metta, loving kindness, there are different traditions have different numbers of these, but there are basically 4. And there's one that's called mudita, which is sympathetic joy, that we revel in the joy of another being because there's no distinction between self and other. So their joy is our joy. And one thing that Roshi Bernie did was he said joy and sorrow, that we share both of those. And so we acknowledge our own grief, we acknowledge our own sorrow, and we're also aware of the joys and sorrows of others. And we, compassion to feel, to experience together. So we have compassion for this person, and we share their joy and we share their sorrows. So 2 things: accept the grief, accept where you are with the grief, and then be aware of both sharing one's own experience and being aware of the experience of others and trying to join that as best we can.
Thank you, Roshi.
Yeah.
So
Okay.
I want to first just say thank you, Roshi, for being here. Thank you for the wonderful, and I'm sure at times difficult, work that you do to serve others through these organizations and through your Dharma teaching, of course. And then actually we have someone with one more question. So shall we finish up with one more question before we go? I'm totally fine with interrupting my whatever spiel for something more important. Great. Rick, please ask your question.
Delightful. Thank you, John. Thank you, Daiken. So I was prompted by the accept what is happening, just like fundamental meditation teaching. So the question is, how do we learn to trust what is happening, what comes next, who we are in this moment, the trust.
It's often said that the 3 pillars of Zen are great faith, great doubt, and great determination. That one falls 7 times but gets up 8 times. And those are great metaphors for living one's life, as well as living a life that's oriented through practice. And Roshi Bernie, who I lived with, he and his wife Jishu, as they were moving away from Greyston and beginning to create the Peacemaker work. And one thing that he used to say was that there's not the right thing, there's just the next thing. So many of us want, it's kind of like, oh my gosh, what's the right thing to do? And, we evaluate and we research and we try to figure out and we make a choice. And then something else happens. Life happens, things happen. So, Bernie's teaching that, we've spent a lot of time trying to discern what the right choice is or what the right action is in a given situation. And ultimately, we do something. We make a choice, or we choose to not choose, and that is our choice. And then that kind of moves things in one direction, and then the next moment, new opportunities and new choices to be made. So this idea of having faith that where we are is totally fine. And it's where we are in this given moment. So we can't necessarily change it. We can make a choice and then go do something else. But in this moment, there's 15 of us sitting here listening to me babble on. And if one person had chosen not to show up, then the constellation of the energy would be totally different. If another person had been able to free up their schedule and showed up, it would be totally changed and different. But here we are right now. And so to have faith that this is okay, just as it is, just thus, can be a way to kind of help with those that question of how do we learn to trust our choices, and we get better at understanding ourselves. I think that's part of a contemplative practice, is that we know, we hopefully we become more aware of how we are in the world, and things that work and things that don't work. Short story longer, my teacher, a person that he's known for like 60 years, they were, they misspent part of their youth together, running around in the streets of the Bronx. And my teacher became a Zen teacher, and this other teacher became a Pentecostal minister. And the Reverend Ray's son was running for city council. And so my teacher was helping with that. And so like one morning, like on election day morning, like 5 o'clock in the morning, we have to get up and go to the main office of the campaign. And somebody asked me if I could hand out flyers at the subway, like, voting flyers at the subway. And I did that for about, and it was like a 5-minute walk to the subway. And I did that for about 5 minutes. And I said, yeah, this isn't a good use of my time. This is not who I am and how I am. And so I went back and started to clean the office, which was a mess because it was, kind of people running around, and they'd been up for 3 days. And so I wound up, that was a better use of who I am and how I am in the world. I would rather do that than stand out, in the cold November day, handing out flyers to people who are going to look at it and throw it away. And so all that being said, that we learn who we are and how we are in the world, and not to kind of pigeonhole ourselves and saying, oh, well, I'm always like this. But we learn, yeah, maybe not that. Maybe I'm not going to be an accountant or whatever. That's just not my interest. And so, and that's part of this as well, that we learn, that this, I benefit from this supports me, this sustains me, and that not so much. And so we move away from those things that may not do that for us. And there's a Patti Smith quote, we grow old, we shed our skins, we become ourselves. And so, as we as we age and we move away from kind of youthful endeavors, and as we get to know ourselves better, we become more who we are. And that helps with that process of making our way through reality.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you, Roshi.
Mm-hmm.
So, what a lovely note on which to close. Roshi, are there any final things that you would like to say before we wrap?
The cat walked off with my notes. So
there's a teaching there, surely.
Well, yeah. Yeah, there's a lot I could say. The whole idea of in Buddhism and in Zen in particular, there's a strong emphasis on enlightenment. In the Japanese tradition, Satori or Kensho, that one catches a glimpse of what it is to be, and then refines that glimpse into and embodies that glimpse. And the three treasures of the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha show us that already. So a lot of folks will kind of, put a lot of effort into becoming enlightened or evaluating, am I enlightened? Is that person enlightened? And once upon a time, Dharma transmission was only for those people who a teacher felt was embodying an understanding of what it is, with the marks of no fixed self and impermanence and all those kind of factors. And then somebody like, there's a Japanese teacher, 13th century, named Dogen, who basically said practice and enlightenment are one. So the intention of one's practice is an expression of their understanding and awareness. And for a person to sit one moment with that connection with all reality, past, present, and future, and all beings, that is a benefit to all beings, including the person, including the one individual consciousness, the drop of water in the ocean of reality, having that experience, but then it also transmits. And the historical Buddha, when he had his experience with the morning star, put his hand on the earth and said, I, the great earth, and all beings simultaneously achieve this. So it wasn't a personal thing. So to the degree that we can move back away from kind of self-interest and self-reflection and open ourselves up to our interrelatedness to all phenomena, past, present, and future, then we can be more fully who and how we are in the world. And from that, we follow the precepts of doing good and doing good for others.
Thank you, Roshi.
Amen.
With that, I think we'll wrap for the evening. Thanks everyone for being here. Thank you, Nelson Roshi. Thank you, everyone. Have a wonderful evening. See you all soon.
Thank you all for your practice.